Anyone fancy watching Nigel Farage get absolutely bodied on Sky News? I certainly do. Over the weekend, Farage found himself stumbling a number of times when trying to say that Jim Ratcliffe was correct in his comments concerning the colonisation of Britain as a result of immigration. Despite Ratcliffe releasing this statement recently, I'm sorry that my choice of language has offended some people in the UK and Europe and caused concern, but it is important to raise the issue of controlled and well managed immigration that supports economic growth. My intention was to stress that governments must manage migration alongside investment in skills, industry, and jobs so that long term prosperity is shared by everyone. It is critical that we maintain an open debate on the challenges facing the UK. Boring. So utterly boring. Sorry if that was loud in your ears, but it's so boring. I'm not even trying to unpack this partial retraction Ratcliffe has made and this feeble apology that wasn't even an apology, by the way. It was an apology made by a feeble man who, frankly, should be looking better than how he looks with his billionaire money. He's probably so tired looking because of Man United's performance this season. But that's a conversation for another day. I'm not trying to upset Man United supporters. What I'm really keen to do is unpack Farage, though. So let's have a look.
Was Jim Ratcliffe right to apologise for his comments?
No, he apologised for the use of one word.
Colonisation.
Yeah, he didn't apologise for his comments. So what did he say? He said 12 million people have come to the country in the last few years. Fact.
Well, he got his facts wrong, actually. He got the dates wrong, didn't he?
He meant 2000, he said 2020. But since 2000, 12 million people is the population increase in Britain. Over 85% of that is the direct impact of immigration. So that's a fact. There are 9 million people living in Britain of working age on benefits of some kind, albeit some of them in work benefits, I will grant you.
Most of them are in work benefits, actually.
Is this man aware that supplementing something at the end with fact doesn't actually make it a fact? Well, firstly, can we reflect on the fact that Farage tried to anchor his argument in what sounded like a killer stat? He said that since 2000, the UK population has grown by around 12 million, and that more than 85% of that is the direct impact of immigration. Now, that sounds pretty dramatic. It sounds like a measurable influx, but that is not actually what those numbers mean. Farage's phrasing suggests 85% of the population increase equals people physically arriving. But I don't think it takes Einstein to know that population growth is not the same thing as immigration. Population rises for two reasons. Yes, people move here and people are also born here. And in that time, people also pass away too. All of those things contribute to population change. When commentators attribute that growth to migration, they're often using demographic modeling, essentially saying that without earlier migration, those births might not have happened. Newsflash, darlings, there is no official statistic that says 85% of population growth is immigrants arriving. The way in which the ONS breaks down population change is into three separate components: one, net migration; two, the number of births; and three, the number of deaths. So that figure that Farage has latched onto is an interpretation, not a direct measurement. And then what gets presented as a hard fact is actually an assumption about long term demographic patterns. And that distinction really matters because one describes who lives here, the other implies who arrived here, and those two are not the same thing. Farage also pointed to the headline figure that roughly 9 to 10 million working age people receive benefits, presenting it as evidence of mass dependency. But that framing leaves out how the modern welfare system actually works. Are we all on the same page about this? Because this conversation gets pretty tiring after a while. That universal credit is not just an unemployment payment, as the right like to frame it. It's literally designed to support people who are in work but earning too little to meet basic costs like rent, childcare, and energy bills. 2 decades of weak pay growth has left poorer households stuck, facing a 137-year wait for living standards to double. People are literally struggling, guys, to live off their wages because of insane wage stagnation. We know this stuff. We know it. In January 2025, there were 7.5 million people on UC. Of those 7.5 million, 37% of them are working. So that makes 2.7 million people. Meanwhile, many of those who aren't expected to work, nor should they be shamed for it, are people with disabilities who often get forgotten about, those of caring responsibilities who often get left out of the conversation, and others in similar circumstances. People like Farage are always spewing these so-called facts with zero regard of compassion, or zero regard or compassion for people's lived realities. So when you hear a big headline number about people on benefits, remember it describes a very, very mixed group. Workers on low pay because of wage stagnation, a deliberate political choice, by the way. Carers, who, like I said, everyone seems to forget, disabled people. Everyone gets angry on their behalf if you park in a disabled space, but not angry enough about how degrading and shameful the accessibility of services and the welfare state can be. Instead, some direct their anger at the disabled community for needing to access universal credit. Families who genuinely need support. What looks like welfare expansion is, in many cases, the state compensating for structural pressures in the economy itself. Anyway, enough of me talking. Let's watch some more Farage.
Well, he got his facts wrong, actually. He got the dates wrong, didn't he?
He meant 2000, he said 2020. But since 2000, 12 million people is the population increase in Britain. Over 85% of that is the direct impact of immigration. So that's a fact. There are 9 million people living in Britain of working age on benefits of some kind, albeit some of them in work benefits, I will grant you.
Most of them are in work benefits, actually.
Now he doesn't entirely disagree with Ratcliffe, does he? But how baseless is this argument, honestly? Oh, go on the underground, the signs are in different languages, the census says X number of people don't speak English. So what does the ONS actually say? Well, according to the ONS, 91.1% of residents reported English or Welsh in Wales as their main language. Of those whose main language was not English or Welsh, the majority said they could speak English well or very well. Only 1.5% of the population, so about 880,000 people, reported that they could not speak English well or at all, and only 3.1% could not speak English at all. So calling any of this colonization is insane, and it doesn't clarify the issue. It just utterly obscures it, because colonization is something done to a country through conquest and extraction. What Farage is describing is a country grappling, and sometimes very badly, with growth and globalization and its own economic choices. And if you misname the problem, you don't solve it. You just turn all of this frustration into grievance while the underlying policies remain completely untouched. Let's look at more, and it's Farage bootlicking Ratcliffe.
So Jim Ratcliffe himself is an economic migrant, isn't he? He lives in Monaco. Should he speak French or Monegasque living there?
He would probably argue that he's a refugee from the British tax system, but that's a separate debate.
He's an economic migrant, isn't he?
Monaco is a...
Is he an economic migrant, yes or no?
He's a tax migrant.
He's an economic migrant then, isn't he?
Yes, he is, but you know what? He's not claiming Social Security.
But he's
not claiming Social Security.
He's not paying taxes that could go on people's benefits.
Nobody's spending lots of money in Monaco employing people and spending money in the high street.
Well, he's actually, Nigel Farage, he's cut hundreds of jobs here in the UK, in Grangemouth. He wanted to build...
Do you know why?
Hang on a second. He wanted to build his Ineos Grenadier car in Wales. You know where it's built now? It's built in France.
Yeah. And
so how much has he contributed?
And I suspect that Grangemouth will close. The last major manufacturing plant in Scotland will close. It may well be that Ineos have no UK presence at all in a few years' time. And do you know why?
It's not a good thing.
Do you know why? Moronic energy policy put in place by both Conservative and Labour governments. And we need to be real about this. If we want people like Jim Ratcliffe investing in Britain, employing thousands of people, we have to create the right conditions for them.
Do you want...
No special favours, but the right conditions.
Do you want...
Hilarious. It's so hard not to laugh at him. Create the right conditions for billionaires like Ratcliffe. Are the conditions not good enough for them? Are they the ones going to food banks? Were they on free school meals at school? One would think that he wants Ratcliffe to be Reform's next donor.
Do you want people like Jim Ratcliffe as Reform supporters, as Reform donors? Is he going to be a donor?
I don't know, but what I have asked him, I'll be honest with you, what I have asked him is to advise me on how we put together an industrial strategy for this country.
Don't lie. You've asked for his money, Nige. I do think I've spoken enough, and I'm really intrigued to hear Banseca's analysis, actually. Firstly, I don't know about you, but I'm really, really worn out, Banseca, with the shaming that comes with accessing the welfare system. When do you think this will ever end?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I will say that's really funny to me is that colonization is now bad. Like, for ages, we were told colonization was fine, or it wasn't that bad when it was happening to Black and brown people historically and currently. But now, when it's happening to us, even though it's not, it's bad. It's very, like, constantly moving the goalposts. So I get very, very, very confused. Yeah, I mean, I spent, like, in terms of, like, thinking about accessing, like, the welfare system and things like that, I actually spent my Sunday morning, like, a sadomasochist on BBC Sunday Live talking to some very bad faith people about welfare, and we have conversations in this country about class, where we say, we must listen to working class people's concerns, which we should do. But it never seems to amount to anything outside of immigration. So when it comes to migration, we have this conversation all the time where the right constantly wants to say we have to listen to working class people. They don't want to listen to working class people when it comes to concerns around food bank usage skyrocketing, how expensive the privatized train system is. So it's this very kind of narrow, niched out way of listening to working class people's concerns, which really is just about migration and nothing else. It's easy to feel like you're on crazy pills because, of course, we've been having this conversation in some form in this country for the past 15 years. Half of my life has been marked by austerity politics, which is exactly what this kind of view or perspective is. When we look at how people on universal credit, for example, are living, it's not generous at all. It's not a generous system. Many people on out of work benefits have sick and caring responsibilities. They're in insecure short-term jobs. We have a really weak labour market as well for working class people in this country, particularly kind of like young graduates whose jobs are going to probably be beaten up by AI. So it's just really tiresome to kind of hear these people constantly be on about, let's create amazing conditions for wealthy people. Like they haven't already got incredible conditions as it stands, especially in comparison to many other comparative countries like France or Spain, where the amount of tax that they pay in those countries is still higher. So it feels like we're in this never-ending cycle where we're constantly talking about the same things as kind of constant diagnosis of the same problems with the same answers, and nobody is saying the obvious thing, which is that actually we need to try something different and we need to try something new. We need to have a reinvestment in our public services. We need to have a reinvestment in jobs for people. We need the rich to pay their fair share. They're not paying their fair share at the moment. We need things to be done differently in order to have a different outcome, rather than just being sold the same poison over and over again and being told that's the antidote.
No, I completely agree with that. Completely agree with that. And I get so it's a tiresome argument every single time. And I think what's an insult to a lot of us as working people, a lot of us who grew up facing the impacts of austerity, particularly as kids, and even now, like having to go out on strike and all this sort of stuff for wanting better working conditions. You get so frustrated at the likes of Farage sitting there arrogantly, like leaning back on his chair and saying, well, we need to create better conditions for the likes of Ratcliffe so he can stay in this country and invest in the economy. When actually that's not the answer to our problems. Like the answer to our problems is actually a lot simpler than that. And it's just create better conditions for the people who actually contribute to the system themselves. We are the creators of wealth. It's us that do that. But for some reason, they keep pointing to billionaires as the I don't know, our saviors, our angels, in these people who have wings. But I think, how do we combat that then? How would we combat this rhetoric that the likes of Farage try to put out so often?
Well, I think we need to just make the case for distributing wealth, and really challenging again that their biggest weapon is migration and being anti-migrant and being able to pin all of people's economic woes, which are very real and people are experiencing them, onto migrants. So I think you have to be super strong, I think, in countering those narratives, not doing what the Labour Party is doing, where it constantly tries to out reform or meet reform where it's at, like that's going to convert anybody. It's not. Obviously, we can see that. Otherwise, Labour wouldn't be tanking in the polls the way that they are. So I think we need a politics which is unapologetic, going to be pro-migrant and can really do that solidarity building that I think is always going to be really important, I think, and in the interests of working class people. How do we bring different groups of people together? Migrants, working class people, black and brown people. There's huge slippages and overlaps, of course, between all of these different groups of people, and yet there are divides there that kind of get exploited and get weaponized by the likes of Nigel Farage. I'll speak about it probably a bit later when we talk about Zaya Yusuf. But yeah, the right is so good at kind of weaponizing these divisions, and we need a proper kind of solidarity politics, which is multi-identitarian, crosses through class, and really is centered around class to counter this narrative that's out there. I think Zach Polanski's doing a really good job, of that. He's kind of a bit of a lone operator in doing that, in that, we've not had a more vibrant leftist politics like maybe a few months ago we thought we were going to have, or we thought there was going to be more on the table, perhaps with your party. You know, still pending to see what happens with that, of course, but he's a bit of a lone voice. Maybe that'll work to the left's advantage as well, though, because having a lone single person out there with that repeated message again and again is likely also to perhaps to drum up some support. And clearly, you know, the Green Party are really kind of taking advantage of that and hoovering up more and more people's support.